Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada. I think, yeah, I mean, they would be crucial, but I think more than that, voter turnout would decide as to who is inside White House next. And also women. If women turnout is proportionately more than men and with little more swing in favor of Kamala Harris, would see her win. But, it's anybody's guess. And it is the most tightly contested US presidential election ever that I remember that I've been tracking in the last 3 decades or so. So I think it's anybody's game. Very, very difficult. No pollster has been able to predict with any accuracy, with any reasonable degree of confidence so far. And it's very, very interesting because both of them have very different take on various things that affect the economy of the US, geopolitical stuff and different parts of the world which are especially which are at war, be it Russia or Ukraine or Israel, Gaza, Iran, that area. So I think both have very different takes on that. Let's see which way.
So we're
the winds
seeing
blow.
Michael Kugelman, a very close contest in the United States. Just for a moment, imagine that this is a global presidential election where the world and their countries get to decide who they want as the president. Who do you think would win internationally? If governments internationally were to decide whether it will be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who do you think has the advantage internationally and why?
Well, I think that, on the whole, particularly in a moment like now when there's so much instability and volatility and uncertainty in the world, that many world capitals would prefer to see a leader that they would be most comfortable with, and that would be the one that's the least unpredictable, and that would be Kamala Harris. I think that our U.S. allies and partners that remember how things went during the Trump presidency when the NATO alliance and U.S. Relations with treaty allies in Asia took some major blows. And I think that those countries might be a bit concerned about the specter of a return of Trump. But, there are other leaders, I think, that would prefer not to see Harris and would prefer to see Trump, if you talk about a Vladimir Putin, for example. And I think I can't resist saying something about India here. I think that one could argue that there would be trade-offs for India with both Harris and Trump. I think that one could argue that some tension points, whether you're talking about the Russia factor or the issue of human rights, would be less prevalent if Trump were to return to the presidency. But I think that issues like trade tensions could come back to the fore if Trump were to return. Harris, I think, would be someone that New Delhi would be comfortable working with because I think it would largely be seen as a continuation of the Biden administration to an extent. But at the same time, there might be concerns that a President Harris would be willing, like the Biden administration, to make a bit more noise about internal matters in India, such as rights and so on. So hard to give a short answer.
Well, President Trump might be more mercurial, but he's also transactional. Kamala Harris would likely keep the relationship going in the way that it's built up over the last several years. So both offer very different things. I want to welcome Edward Luce, U.S. National Affairs Editor for the Financial Times, and I'm joined by Dr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. For a moment, I want to go across to Dr. Aghi. From the perspective of India Inc., India-America business, do you think Donald Trump works better for that trade relationship or Kamala Harris, or do you think it doesn't really matter so much in the end?
I think it does matter because when you look at Trump has said he is going to impose 20% tax or tariff on goods coming out of India and 60% from China. This will have an impact on India's export into United States. But more important is you have to understand international relations, international trade is tied to stable, predictable policies. And while you have Biden administration, which has provided that stable policies, which may not agree on all of them, but there is predictability. Trump brings that unpredictability, and that's going to have a big impact on global trade, especially from India coming to the United States.
But Trump also might not be so bothered about some of the things that Kamala Harris might likely get very agitated about. And I think Michael Kugelman referred to that. For example, the manner in which Canada and India's ties have nosedived over the past several weeks on account of the alleged assassination attempt on one person in the United States and the assassination of Niger in Canada. Those kind of things Trump might not care very much about, whereas Kamala Harris might make a lot of noise around issues like that, which would be something that the Indian government would be very wary of.
No, absolutely. But you have to understand there's a big difference between what has happened and how it's been dealt by Canadians and the Americans. While Canadians have taken the lead from the Prime Minister's office, accusing India without any credible evidence that India is behind the assassination, whereas in the United States, it's not the Biden administration which has taken the lead, it's more of the Justice Department which has taken the lead, driven through a process, while India and the United States are working in a very mature manner. So I think that process will continue regardless who comes in, either Trump or Kamala Harris. So I don't think that's not going to change. But overall, I would say that while Trump has stated very clearly that he prefers Prime Minister Modi, he likes Prime Minister Modi, he does not like India as a tariff king itself. So you will see a split approach while he's going to talk about Prime Minister Modi in a very, very positive manner, but he's going to focus a lot on India's tariff. But you have to understand, India has a trade surplus with the United States. Unless that comes to a level between the two countries, he's going to keep on poking at India from a trade perspective.
Okay, I think Mukesh Aghi making clear that from a trade and investment perspective, maybe he thinks Kamala Harris might be more stable and easier to deal with. Thank you very much, Dr. Aghi. We'll come back to you once we actually know who won, and then we'll discuss what impact this has. For the moment, I want to go across to Edward Luce. Mr. Luce, I read your commentary very carefully. You know, this is a very tight election. Is it really just down to those 7 battleground states and who wins those, or do you think in the other states as well, where everyone's taking for granted that these are either blue or red states, that there could be changes which also people need to look out for very carefully?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, you know, in America's season 8 is not going to end without a surprise twist. And the nature of U.S. politics has been so weirdly a combination of volatility and absolute sort of predictable 50-50 nature. And the combination of those two is something's going to happen in the next 24 hours or in the rest of today that we haven't foreseen. And it might be one of the non-swing states flipping, surprisingly, to the other candidate and changing the whole nature of this race. Or it could be that in spite of the fact this is razor close, dead heat, etc., that we actually get a clear result early this evening and we're all in bed by midnight. I really have no idea. And anybody who does have an idea is bluffing.
Sure. One of the things the Harris campaign seems to be betting on is a stronger ground game. They've outspent the Trump campaign by far. They claim that they've got the maximum number of volunteers on the ground, going knocking on doors, urging voters to go out and cast their votes. Do you think that makes much of a difference, or do you think given the level of polarization, voters will decide one way or the other what they want to do, and it doesn't really matter how strong your ground game is?
I think ground game always matters because, you know, this is not an election of swing voters. This is an election where most people made their mind up ages ago, and therefore the game is to get them to the polling booths and voting. Almost always the presidential candidate with more money wins. The only exception to that was 2016. Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump quite a bit, and of course she lost. Kamala Harris does have more money than Trump. And if you look at the ground game, Trump has outsourced a lot of the work to Elon Musk, to a super PAC created by Elon Musk, who has no previous electoral experience, and there have been some serious problems with what his canvassers have been doing on the ground and whether they've been paid. So there are a lot of eccentricities on the Trump side that if he does come to lose, and I, again, just want to underline, I don't know which way it's going to go, but if he does come to lose, those sorts of decisions will, I think, the Musk one in particular, will feature in the recriminations.
No, because that's the other thing. If he does lose, will he accept the verdict? He's indicated in 1 or 2 interviews when he was asked, do you think you can lose? He says, yeah, maybe I might, but I don't think it'll happen. He's accepted the possibility of actually ending up on the losing side. will he bow down, accept Harris as his president, or will we see another massive ruckus and possible violence after the votes have been counted?
So I don't think violence is nearly as likely, regardless of the outcome in 2024 as it was last time. Last time Trump was president, and he was inciting the protesters to storm Capitol Hill, and he refused requests to bring in the National Guard to break up the protesters and protect Capitol Hill. This time, whoever wins, Biden will be president for the next 100 days or so, and has no incentive to incite violence. So I don't think that's going to be the issue this time. History doesn't repeat itself, but I do think it's extremely unlikely Donald Trump would accept the results if Kamala Harris turns out to be the winner tonight or in the next few days. He has on many occasions said this will be rigged, this is an unfair election, and there will be cheating going on. And he's been saying it incessantly, actually, in the last 2 or 3 days. So Trump bowing out and sort of going off into the sunset is not on my bingo card.
Well, he won't likely go into the sunset. He may end up in jail, which also makes it more likely that he'll want to contest the results, no matter, especially if he ends up on the losing side. If men are disproportionately wanting to vote in favor of Trump, according to the polls, and women in favor of Kamala Harris, it comes down to where is their higher propensity to go out and vote, where is the level of interest and enthusiasm higher. On that, Edward Luce, before I let you go, which voting group do you think is more enthusiastic? Are you seeing more enthusiasm amongst men or women?
I'm seeing quite a lot of enthusiasm amongst both, but it's what I would call negative enthusiasm. A real dislike of the other candidate is their chief motivation. So, I mean, historically, women do tend to vote in higher numbers. I think 53% of the electorate last time were female. I'm expecting that to be higher this time, but also that the share of women who vote for Kamala Harris or vote for the Democratic nominee being higher than normal as well because of this whole abortion issue. Women do tend to be a little bit more reliable about voting. So if you were on the Harris campaign and you were clutching at straws right now, I think the gender gap in how reliable you are at turning up to vote would be one of those straws.
I'd leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us, Edward Luce. I want to go across to Danielle Block, Senior Editor at Foreign Affairs. One of the things which tripped voters, which tripped pollsters the last time, was a lot of people who were voting for Donald Trump were awkward, embarrassed about admitting it, which is why pollsters had to apply for the midterms so many algorithms and ways to try and account for that, which is what ultimately tripped their midterm polls over. So it's really the kind of election where you just sit back, have your coffee, have your popcorn or whatever it is that you will, and allow for the actual votes to be counted. Is this something that you're looking at as well? The fact that voters may not be indicating their actual voting intent when they're being asked about who they intend to vote for, which is why the end result may not be as close as some of these polls are suggesting.
I think that the difficulty pollsters have had when Trump is on the ballot is one of the more interesting storylines that we're going to watch over the course of the night play out. And to your point, in both 2016 and 2020, pollsters had a lot of trouble capturing just how many people would vote for Trump. The exact reasons why that is are disputed. It seems like they had a lot of trouble actually reaching out to Trump's base and simply getting such people on the phone. What's interesting is after 2016, they tried to compensate for that by sampling more white people who didn't go to college. And the idea was that in 2016, they failed to capture enough of those people. Then by sampling more of them, they'd be able to more accurately get the result. And then in 2020, they actually underpredicted Trump's vote share by even more. Biden nonetheless won. So what they've started to do between now and then, they've done a couple of things, but one of the really big things pollsters have started to do is to actually build their models around factors that they don't normally build their models around, like the partisan ID of their sample. And so the question is, will this be enough to accurately capture Trump's vote share? Will it underestimate him again? Have they gotten it wrong again? Or there's some talk that perhaps they're now overestimating Trump's vote share. So polling errors are different from election to election. In the 2022 midterms, they underestimated how Democrats would perform. So really, we just don't know. In part, again, because we don't exactly know what caused the polling errors in the past.
Well, it's, since we deal with a lot of polling and pollsters in India, this is a nightmare situation for anybody to be in. So you've got two kinds of voters. You've got clear Republican voters. You've got clear voters who are very clearly leaning towards the Democrats. Let's look at independent voters who ultimately, which side they swing will determine where this election goes. And it's also showing the extreme level to which the United States seem polarized. So it's these undecided voters. At the end of the day, nobody will be undecided once polling is over. But it's these undecided voters that both the campaigns have been trying to woo assiduously over the past several weeks. Now, according to the NBC National poll, 51% of the independent voters who identify themselves as independent, not leaning Democrat or Republican, said they'd vote for Kamala Harris. 43% said they'd vote for Donald Trump. If you add to the registered Democrat voters the independent voters as well, it would seem that Kamala Harris is in front. But ordinarily, if you look at the level of anti-incumbency, when Americans were asked, are you satisfied with the way the government has been performing, 70% said they were not happy. Now, that's a very, very big number. Daniel Block, now, usually, if that's the level of anti-incumbency, then it really should be a shoo-in for the non-incumbent, for the challenger, which in this case is Donald Trump. But because he's Donald Trump and because of what happened in the past and because of the negativity that he carries to his campaign, it's a much tighter election than it otherwise would have been. Otherwise, this level of dissatisfaction in any country, the incumbent would very clearly be on the way out.
You're right that anti-incumbency bias should be a huge factor here. As you've noted, it's not just the United States. Across the world, incumbents have been tossed out, or they've performed more poorly than expected. We saw that in India's recent election where the BJP lost its outright majority. And if Harris loses and Trump wins, expect that to see a reason that's cited. It's very rare. I can't think of the last time, if ever, that an incumbent party that's not running an incumbent presidential candidate for re-election has managed to win when most people think the country is headed in the wrong direction. Having said that, as you noted, there are a few factors that work to Harris's advantage. One is that she's not Biden. She's his vice president, but she's, as a result, able to create some space between him. She's also younger than both Biden and Trump, which allows her to project a more kind of forward-looking energy. The other is, as you said, Trump, and there's two facts about Trump. The first is the fact that he's an incredibly controversial candidate. He is widely disdained by a large portion of the population, also widely beloved by a large portion of the population, so it cuts both ways. The other is he was not president all that long ago. And Americans now have a fonder recollection of his presidency than they did when he was in office. But as a result, Harris has attempted to kind of saddle him with some of the baggage of incumbency. One of the slogans of her campaign is, "We're not going back." So it's unclear to some extent how much anti-incumbency bias is going to work all against Harris, or if some of that will be applied to Trump as well.
Catherine Hedda, when you look at the level of people who think the country is going in the wrong direction, if 3/4 of the respondents in any poll say they think the country is going in the wrong direction, it really should be a slam dunk for the challenger, the anti-incumbent, but yet the polls paint a very different picture. So a lot of dissatisfaction coming out in these polling numbers.
Yeah, I think Daniel got it right. I think the Harris campaign is trying to portray Trump as the incumbent, and it hasn't been all that long. I wanted to touch a little bit, though, on the hidden Trump voters, because in the past that was definitely true. And I have always found it true that a lot of times when people lie to polls, which they do, they lie because they're voting in a way that they think will get them condemned in some way. At this point in our political life in the United States, I think those kind of Trump voters are rarer. I think if we're looking for something unexpected, it may be the hidden Harris voter, the woman in Pennsylvania, or even the man in rural Pennsylvania that can vote a lot like Georgia votes. They don't want to admit to their extended family, to their neighbors, to their church, how they're going to vote this time, because it's that divisive. So I really think it is anyone's game at this time. And I thought there was a very controversial recent poll from Iowa. Rahul, you seem to follow everything, so you probably saw this. But Iowa, which is a red state, this one pollster, who's a woman, I want to add, found that Harris would win Iowa, which was very controversial. But what she found was the gender gap that you described. And it was particularly striking for women over 65 who in the past had followed Trump, but were now breaking for Harris 2-1.
Sure, and that's an important factor. I want to look at how some of the communities are voting. Let's start with white men and also then non-white men. We'll also talk a bit about people of Indian American origin. The Latinos have been in the news as well. So let's take you through how the community vote is going. Let's start with white voters. 54% saying they're picking Donald Trump. Kamala Harris would be the first woman of color. If she were to get elected, 45% of white voters, so she's weak amongst white voters, 45% of white voters saying they'd vote for Kamala Harris. If we now come to the non-white voters, just taken as a whole, here is where Kamala Harris has a massive advantage. Remember, American demographics have been changing very rapidly. The percentage of whites coming down, non-whites going up. 63% of non-white voters say in this PBS NewsHour Marist poll that they'd vote Kamala Harris versus 34% Donald Trump. This is really Donald Trump's weak link. Let's for a moment take a look at Latino voters. And amongst Latino voters, again, there's been a big blowback against Donald Trump for some of the comments that have been made by him and people associated with his campaign during the campaign trail. 44% saying they'd pick Donald Trump, 53% of Latino voters saying they'd pick Kamala Harris. I want to go across to Jan Krishna on the Indian American community. Usually they were seen as being pro-Democrat. Later, Republicans started picking up a lot of vote as well. Is there one candidate who has, in your view, disproportionate advantage amongst Indian Americans? We're seeing Donald Trump oftentimes reach out to Hindus. He spoke about attacks against the Hindu community in Bangladesh and elsewhere. So he's very consciously making an effort to try and attract Hindu voters.
See, Rahul, as far as the Indian diaspora in the US is concerned, my feeling is they will tilt a little more towards Kamala Harris, because at the end of the day, the choice they have to make is make it, what kind of leadership they want to elect. With Kamala Harris, widely it is expected that she'll be more humanitarian, more principled, more responsible leader. And also there'll be a policy continuity with Kamala Harris, she'll be more predictable. Whereas Trump, a lot of people believe that, he will be divisive, he will even be vindictive, and as the world needs leaders who are more multilateral in their thinking, Trump is clearly more unilateral. He believes in Americanism versus globalism. For him, America comes first, no matter what be the cost. So my worry is, and I'm sure Indian community in the US also thinks the same way. Things like climate change, for example. I mean, we have seen in the last presidency how Trump had walked away from the Paris Accord, and which could have played havoc against the war against climate change. So I think there are lots of issues. UN institutions he doesn't believe in. I mean, not that UN doesn't need to be reformed, but he had reduced the funding to the UN UN bodies. And US is the largest funder. If you look at Europe, Trump could be Europe's nightmare. NATO nations, he has talked about walking out of NATO. He's forcing NATO countries to spend a certain percentage of their GDP on defense. So there are lots of such things, where the stand on for example, let's talk about the Ukraine and Russia war. One doesn't know which side, how he would resolve those things, because he is known, and several occasions he has said he's expressed his liking for Putin. He says he's a very strong leader.
So let me hold you there and put that question to Michael Kugelman. Michael, step into the minds of world leaders like Vladimir Zelensky, like Vladimir Putin, like Mr. Zelensky, like Xi Jinping, and tell us from their lens and from the lens of their national interest, who would they rather see and why someone like Xi Jinping would really not want to see Donald Trump, because if he raises tariffs in the way that he's saying, what impact could that have on the geopolitical order?
Rep, this is one of the challenges of trying to make sense of this, and that is that
So all experts are saying it's too close to call. 49% either side, and the 7 swing states, they will decide, and we are likely to know if everything goes as per plan, if voters are very clear, then by tomorrow or in the next 12 hours, the situation should be clear. But the bigger question that we're asking here on India Today, who's better for India? Does it even make a difference, or does India enjoy that bipartisan support and it doesn't really matter who's in the White House, whether it's Donald Trump? India's dealt with him extensively when he was President of the United States of America, or is it Kamala Harris? India's dealt with her when she was Vice President of the United States in the Biden administration. Dr. Brahma Chilani, Professor Brahma Chilani joins me on this broadcast, and he's someone who's watching these elections very closely. Professor Chilani, I know you have a flight to catch, but before you take that flight, I want to understand from you, in your appreciation, too close to call, who's likely to make it to White House, and in your appreciation, does it make a difference whether it's Trump or Kamala Harris as far as India is concerned?
The old theory is that US-India relations fare better when the Republicans are in the White House. But complicating that theory is the fact that Trump now is facing an Indian American, Kamala Harris. So many Indians in the US, Indian Americans, I mean, are actually inclined towards Kamala Harris. But then we had an Indian American British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And did the relationship between Britain and India improve significantly? No. In fact, last year, the Khalistanis in London stormed the Indian High Commission. Yes. So having an Indian American in the White House may not necessarily repair the damage to the US-India relationship that has been inflicted under Biden's presidency. We have seen how, in the last couple of years, this relationship between the US and India has developed new tensions, new strains, especially as the Biden administration has tried to leverage its various strengths against India, including using the Khalistan card against India. It began with the attempt to bully India to toe the US line on the Ukraine war, an attempt that failed. But then we've had other issues coming up, and most recently, the Americans have slapped sanctions on 19 Indian firms for allegedly supplying, quote-unquote, dual-use items to Russia. So I think this relationship between the US and India needs to be repaired, and the new president who's elected will have a task on hand.
Okay, that's an important aspect that you raised, and in your appreciation, given the way that it's frayed, if it is under the Biden administration, would Trump be better? Let me just throw that open. Lenka White is a journalist who joins us from the United States. Aviruk Sen is author of that best-selling book, Looking for America, joins me on the broadcast. And Aviruk, your appreciation, who's better for India, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Look, when after hearing a person like Professor Chelani, it's not it's not my place to really comment on affairs of the state which are so high. But I can tell you one thing though, which is that there is a great chemistry between Mr. Narendra Modi and Mr. Donald Trump, and that somehow or the other is perceived as translating to some better relations between India and the US. That chemistry is predicated on something quite simple, which is a propensity towards authoritarianism. They both like strong men. They love large rallies. They love the spectacle. If you ask me, from what I have seen of Mr. Trump, he is dangerously ill-informed about foreign affairs, or any affairs, frankly, except with apart from those with porn stars. However, his problem is different, is that he's not going to be driving the agenda. Some other people will be driving the agenda. The rhetoric has been divisive, and it is going to cut across the board to Indians living in the States. But, I mean, all of that said, the key thing in the relationship is China. So whoever feels that it's beneficial for the other, vis-a-vis the China standpoint, they are the ones that are going to, benefit out of this relationship. And
Okay.
on that, there is some common ground, yeah, whether it's Democrat
So,
or Republican.
while there is common ground, but Professor Chilani, few people understand China better than you. Usually people say it's very difficult to scrutinize the Chinese, but you've been very, very clear about the threat posed by China, even at a time when, the country was going through phases of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai in whatever avatar in the early 2000s and post 2014 till 2020 Galwan. But who's likely to be tougher on China? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
When Trump was in the White House, he undertook a paradigm shift in America's China policy. From Richard Nixon to Barack Obama, America aided China's economic rise.
Yes.
That 45-year-long policy created the greatest adversary the United States has ever faced in its history. So Trump, on a bipartisan basis, changed that policy. He began identifying China as an adversary, as a major challenger. And I think that he understands that if the US remains fixated on Russia, remains deeply involved in the Ukraine war, it will have less room to focus on the larger threat from China. So Trump will seek to end the Ukraine war, at least end the US bankrolling of Ukraine, which will result in Ukraine agreeing to negotiations and to a ceasefire. Because under Biden, the Americans have become so deeply involved in the Ukraine war, in this proxy war with Russia, that Biden has been pursuing a conciliatory approach toward China because he does not want to take on two great powers simultaneously. So he has invested considerable political capital in personal diplomacy with Xi Jinping because he doesn't want China to cement a strategic and military alliance with Russia against America. So his whole approach toward China has been constrained by the fact that Biden has deeply involved the US in the Ukraine war, and this proxy war with Russia is leaving less room for the US to deal with the China threat. And I think Trump is likely to correct that and recalibrate American foreign policy.
Very interesting. You should point that out. And gentlemen, stay with me because this conversation is becoming extremely, extremely interesting. I want to bring Lenka White into this conversation. And are these aspects big for voters in the United States of America, especially the conflict in Ukraine? Are they looking for an end to that conflict? And are they looking at focusing on the real threat, as many put it, that is China? Lenka White?
Thank you very much. Great question. Looking at the statistics, though, I would say that number one issue for all American voters is the economy. It's, do they afford, can they afford the food products? The inflation got higher. Do they have enough money? So this is the number one priority. Number two, according to the rankings, is usually immigration and then abortion. So after all these 3 points, I think the Americans actually start to think, how is the foreign policy? Are we happy with that? Of course, they are aware that right now the United States is sending their taxpayer money abroad. It's especially a big issue for the Republicans. They know that they sent about $200 billion to Ukraine. And at the same time, the United States was not able to help its own people after the natural disasters in North Carolina or the chemical spill attack in Ohio. They always send them like $500 after their house was wiped out. So many Americans are aware of this, and of course they don't like it. But this is mostly the Republican issue at this point. So I would personally think it's important. It's very important, but they have more pressing priorities like, can I afford to buy the eggs tomorrow?
And that truly is, and that's where Donald Trump and the Republican Party is saying that are you better today than you were 4 years ago, or are you worse off? But I'll come to that aspect in just a moment, because this interesting thread that we've started on Ukraine and China, I want to delve on it for a moment longer. Aviruk, is Kamala Harris likely to pursue the same policy of Joe Biden on Ukraine and on China in your appreciation?
Look, I'll just address the Trump question first and come to what you're asking. Firstly, if he really wants to be tough on China, Mr. Trump needs to stop printing his Bibles, the Trump Bibles, in that country. Okay. Secondly, when we speak about inflation, one of the key factors that have contributed to runaway inflation for some time is not just the supply chain issues that you had after during COVID, but also tariffs. And Trump's policy seems to be to raise tariffs everywhere. Yes. Now, eventually, somebody is going to pay for those raised tariffs, and it's not going to be the countries that are being supposedly victimized, or whatever you might call it. Just like Mexico never paid for the wall, China is not going to pay for tariffs. It's the American consumer who will pay higher prices for everything. So this simple understanding needs to percolate through to anybody discussing economics in the US at the moment. That tariffs, according to economists across the board, will be disastrous. They'll be to the tune of $4,000 a month, a year, is what the middle class is going to suffer as a result of this policy. Now, in terms of the question that you originally asked, which was, will they see, every president will have a new a framework to work with, and like I said, I think I'm underqualified to talk, greatly on sort of foreign policy matters. However, I will say this, that Biden, and it's through his political career, was always been a man of compromise and of trying to reach across the aisle. He's done that in a number of aspects of his career in politics. Kamala Harris is perhaps not as predisposed to compromise as Mr. Biden. So she will chart her own course. However, it will be a thought-through, informed course. One may not agree with her, but it will not be like, let's send Jared Kushner to the Middle East and solve all its problems. And what he does when he looks at the Gaza Strip is he sees beachfront real estate. And I kid you not, that is exactly what he said. So there will be a seriousness to the engagement in foreign policy affairs if we get a different administration than Trump's.
Okay, or will Biden's policies, or Barack Obama's policies, or Bill Clinton's policies, will they, Professor Chilani, will they be continued? Because, I had Ambassador Kamal Sibal on the broadcast with me, and he said her relative inexperience would mean that a lot of people may be guiding her, and perhaps it'll be more than Biden, it'll be the Obama and the Clinton administration officials who will be calling the shots.
You're right, Gaurav. She's an unknown commodity. She hasn't spoken up on foreign policy issues. She reads her speeches from the teleprompter. She's so beholden to the teleprompter that if she speaks without the teleprompter, she often creates an embarrassment for herself. So being an unknown commodity, nobody knows how she will perform as the president if she were to be elected. But it's clear from her own election campaign that she relied heavily on the Obama staff, the Obama campaign staff. And some people are saying that if she enters the White House, it'll be Obama term 4, this will be the 4th term of Barack Obama, because Biden, as his cognitive decline became increasingly apparent, ceded decision-making increasingly to members of his inner circle. And that was one of the reasons why in the last couple of years, the relations between the US and India came under strain because Biden wasn't in charge. His inner circle, especially people like Blinken, were leading the charge, and Blinken was using the human rights card against India. And as you would recall, that when Modi went in September to the U.S. to attend the Quad Summit, on the eve of his arrival in the U.S., the White House hosted Khalistan militants and senior administration and intelligence officials to brief these Khalistanis. This was quite a move, because it was quite a brazen move. The Indians did not react to that, but this is one of the reasons why this relationship between the U.S. and India, this was a blossoming relationship. Every president since Bill Clinton has left the relationship with India in stronger shape than what he inherited. But Biden is leaving a damaged relationship to his successor to mend, and it's largely because Biden's own memory issues resulted in him ceding decision-making to his inner circle. That's very unfortunate, but I think whoever is elected will have to make it a priority to improve relations with India, because if the U.S. wants to avoid strategic overreach, given the fact that it's facing escalating rivalry with Russia and with China, it needs India, especially if it wants to pivot to the Indo-Pacific. It needs India more than ever. And therefore, it makes strategic sense for the U.S. to make this relationship with India robust.
No, but do they want to make this relationship with India robust? That's the point I was coming to. If it's Kamala Harris, because of all that is happening, you know, whether it was quoting the Khalistanis before Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit for the visit to the United States of America, or all these Khalistani allegations that have come up, and the Khalistanis rearing their heads in the United States and in Canada, is there a pattern to all of this? Is the United States trying to send out some kind of a message to India, Professor Chilani?
It appears that in the twilight of the Biden administration, people in his inner circle have tried to leverage the Khalistan militancy against India. They have, in fact, they set up Trudeau against India.
Yes.
They supplied sketchy intelligence to Ottawa, which prompted Trudeau to make his allegation against India in September last year. And now Trudeau admits that he was relying not on hard evidence, but on raw intelligence when he made that allegation against India, triggering a downward spiral in Canada-India relations. So we have seen a sort of a pattern. For example, look at this gentleman called Pannon. He's been allowed to make terrorist threats against India from his base in New York with impunity. Imagine if India were to allow a U.S. designated terrorist to operate freely from Indian soil and make threats against American airlines repeatedly. How would the Americans react?
Yep.
And yet this guy has been in the vanguard to ignite communal passions, even among the Indian diaspora in Canada and the U.S. For example, these two temple attacks in Canada last weekend, one in Ontario, one in British Columbia.
Yes.
Those two attacks were organized by Pannon's group, the Sikhs for Justice, which is an India-designated terrorist group. So they're allowing these elements to operate freely from North America to embarrass India. And then we have these other things that have happened in recent months. We have had the U.S. involvement in regime change in Bangladesh, which is a very major development. It appears to be designed to keep India boxed in.
Absolutely.
Boxed in, in South Asia. Instead of creating a democratic transition in Bangladesh, what has emerged is jihadist chaos in Bangladesh, with far-reaching consequences beyond Bangladesh's borders, especially for India.
Yeah. Aviruk and Lenka White, let me bring you in. You've been covering the White House, you've been covering the United States, and will Kamala Harris continue with these policies of Joe Biden? Should she be elected? Is there anything to indicate that she may be different?
A great question. I don't know if she knows if she's any different. Whenever they were asking her how is she going to differ from Joe Biden, her first question was, well, I'm not a Joe Biden, I'm not a man. And second answer was usually, I will bring different experience because I have a different background than Joe Biden. But at no occasion she was actually able to answer how is she going to be different. And of course, even Democratic voters would like to see Kamala Harris behaving differently because they also notice that the prices are higher. Then they don't want to continue with Biden's style of economy. They would like to see changes. And also, of course, everyone noticed that she didn't do great on immigration. There is a large number of immigrants. So even Democratic voters would like to see changes. Definitely. I personally think that most of the Democratic voters, they actually don't like Trump to that degree that they have to opt for Harris, because genuinely, if you hear her speeches, she doesn't have that much to offer. Apart of the fact that it's a woman, she's presentable, she is calm, she's not having the rough statements like Trump, but that's about it. She doesn't really have a good pitch.
Okay, but in her ancestral village in India, there's tremendous excitement. And Aviruk and Lenka, I want to just quickly play out this report that comes from a very tiny hamlet called Thulasendrapuram in Tamil Nadu. And in this Thulasendrapuram, India Today spoke to several people who are actually super excited about Kamala Harris breaking that glass ceiling and becoming the first woman ever to enter White House as president of the United States of America. They're very excited about it. They're hopeful. Listen in.
We are reporting from the Sri Dharmashastra temple in Thulasendrapuram, which is the ancestral village of US Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. If I have to speak about this village, this is the village where Kamala Harris's maternal grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, used to live before he moved to Chennai. And this temple, it also has a stone board which mentions the name of Kamala Harris having donated rupees 5,000 for the temple consecration in the year 2013-2014. It also mentions the names of her aunt, Sarla Gopalan, and her grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, for donating money for the temple works and renovation works, etc. Now, as far as this temple is concerned, the villagers of Thulasendrapuram, they've been offering special prayers. Special pujas are being held in the mornings and in the evenings, praying for Kamala Harris's victory, because it's a high-stake battle that has, played out in the United States. And the results, of course, we're just hours away from knowing who will be the next U.S. president. And I'm joined by the villagers here. It includes the local councillor, the villagers, and someone from US, Chicago. She's Joy. She's come from Chicago all the way to Thulasendrapuram, and she's taken a room right outside the temple and staying there for the night so that she can be associated in some way or the other to Kamala Harris on the day the US presidential election results would be out. You're rooting for Kamala Harris. Tell us why. Why do you think she'll make the next president, and why do you think that'll be the right choice as far as the U.S. is concerned?
Well, Kamala is a uniter, and I believe that that's what we need. She's promised to have advisors from the Republican Party, and I also think that's what we need, enough with the division, let's unite.
Normally, Tamil Nadu insisting for women's empowerment. If she's come just US, no. Sunita Williams, see, she's heading for US NASA space, like that. Everyone, it inspiring every individuals, ladies. So normally, if she got elected, no. So Indo-US relation will be definitely improve.
That, of course, is the sense from the ground, the mood on the ground. All of them really praying for Kamala Harris's victory. It was not an easy election, and it has huge consequences and implications, not just for the US, but for the rest of for the world. And that's the reason why they say every prayer counts, and that's why we're stepping in, praying for Kamala Harris. And they say because of Kamala Harris, Tulasendrapuram has also, become more evident on the global map. With video journalist Daniel, this is Shilpa Nair for India Today.
So, Tulasendrapuram in Tamil Nadu is praying for Kamala Harris to enter the White House, but it all depends on the voters. And I quickly want to cut across to Rohit Sharma, India Today's Rohit Sharma, a man on ground, getting us the latest information from Washington, D.C. and speaking to our team across the United States of America. Rohit, any indications? What's the buzz on ground? Is it very exciting the way it was made out to be? Dead heat? Equally, tremendous excitement on either side?
Well, look, we've gotten reports from everybody in America that the Republican voters are turning up to vote. Something President Biden has been talking about all along on his campaign. He's always said, please turn out to vote. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, the polling center that I've been at stationed this morning from 6:30 a.m., I've seen more Republican voters come in than Democrats. Now, some Democrats leaders are saying this is because Democratic voters usually use mail-in ballots and, they already voted early, which is a possibility. But looks like at least on the day of the event, the Republican voters are coming in. And I've spoken to some of them and, what issues are the most important to them. I probably should say about 80% of them have said immigration and open borders. And that relates to, burden on U.S. economy, that relates to immigrants taking jobs, that relates to crime. And I think these are some of the talking points that President Trump has used on campaign trail. I think he's kept his message very simple, Gaurav. He's always said, were you better off 4 years ago? And I think a lot of Americans have taken to that. I think that is one of the reasons why Republican voters have come out and they're voting a lot today. Also, one Democrat that I encountered, obviously not wanting to talk on camera, said they voted for President Trump because they believe that they do not agree with the fact that Biden and Kamala Harris, the way that all played out with, she got the nomination without fighting primaries. She said Democrats have been talking about preserving democracy. How was that democracy when she got the nomination without even going to primaries? So people do have long memories there. And it looks like, as President Trump also said this morning, very calm, very composed, very disciplined. He thinks he's going to win this. We'll have to wait and watch the Gaurav.
Oh, absolutely. And you'll know that first. You're a man on ground. Stay with me for a moment. Let me get Aviruk and Lenka to quickly respond to some of this anecdotal information that's also coming in. Aviruk, will immigration, and since she was the czar, as many commentators say, prove to be her Achilles heel in these elections? Or will the women voters be able to see her through as she hopes?
I would agree with you that immigration is a sort of top of the mind issue. And this is one, I think there's general agreement that the Biden administration, which included Harris, of course, could have done much better than it actually did. Now, but this election to me is not about Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. It's actually a referendum on the US itself. It's about character, a return to decency, playing by the rules, belief in the system. All these things are really what matter in these polls. And by the end of today, or tomorrow perhaps, we will know which way America has gone from the result. That's why this election is really important.
It's being described as a make or break election for the Democrats and the Republicans.
To me, it's bigger than that. To me, it'll tell you the character of America.
Okay.
I mean,
Lenka,
here you have. Let me just, if I can just complete this.
Of course, please.
This is an exceptional election in many, many ways. You have on one side a candidate who a New York court has literally in its own text called a rapist. There are 34 credible charges of various felonies against him. This has never happened before. Yeah, he's
And yet it's
somebody
neck and
who
neck.
has.
And yet it's neck and neck in the United States of America. But Lenka White, if I could quickly bring you in on this aspect, does this election actually define, as Aviruk puts it, the character of the United States of America and where the US is heading? And economy and immigration, what's a bigger issue for voters, the voters you've been speaking to?
The voters I have been personally speaking to definitely talk a lot about both topics, about economy and immigration. But of course, we have to always think what the voter wants in everyday life the most, what is impacting him or her during the day the most, and that's what he's going to vote about. So most of the voters complain about higher prices. I'm now here in New York City. The prices are really high. They have been skyrocketing. Inflation is about 20% up. Also, the illegal immigrants have been driving the prices up. Here, the hotels are full of them. You can't even book a hotel less than for $300. It's a 2-star or 3-star hotel, so it's nothing like that spectacular. So really, the issue is huge. And I think, as was mentioned, it's maybe not even an issue of Democrat versus Republican. It's almost versus some kind of sense of life for the future versus going to the radical liberal way, what the Democratic Party is right now doing. You have heard many Democratic voters, which actually in the past they were registered Democrats and they now converted for Republicans just because they are really upset with the direction the United States is taking. And probably you have seen Elon Musk. He has been saying it's an existential crisis for the United States. And also, thanks to him, there have been many voters who joined this path of Donald Trump. Thanks to Kennedy joining Donald Trump, Gabbard, all these people are taking the people on this Republican side.
Very interesting you should say that. So stay with me for a moment. I quickly want to cut across to the swing state of Michigan. And joining me from Michigan is Sri Thanedar, U.S. Congressman from Detroit. He joins me on this special broadcast. Sir, how are you? Initial trends, and you've been traveling, you've been speaking to a lot of voters, and Michigan is extremely, extremely important with its 15 votes, voted Democrats in 2020, but Republicans in 2016. What do initial trends indicate, Sri Thanedar?
Gauraji, I'm very good. I am at a polling place in Michigan, meeting with the voters. I see a lot of excitement among the voters. We are getting large number of people have already voted through absentee voting, early voting, but we are also seeing a good turnout. The weather is beautiful. It's a nice warmer day. And people are very excited. It's a very, very close election, and Michigan will be a key state to win to become the next president of the United States.
And, you are in that very crucial swing state, 2016 with Republicans, 2020 with Joe Biden. Will Kamala Harris be able to retain it? You've been working hard.
Look, Kamala Harris has excited a lot of the young people, a lot of people, African-American people, young people, women. Women are coming in large numbers supporting Kamala Harris today.
True. Women are coming in large numbers, but perhaps is that one of the reasons that Elon Musk has also appealed to voters and come out in large numbers and vote, if I remember his exact word, vote as if your life depends on it. What does that indicate?
Well, look, this is a choice. It's a night and day difference. We have two candidates that are entirely different. Kamala Harris projects an optimism and happiness. She is joyful. On the other hand, Trump is very angry and has a lot of complaints, and he is also has issues with legal issues that he's trying to stay out of courts and out of jail. So there is a very contrasting position.
Yes. And the point that you were just raising about women. Women are coming out in large numbers and voting for Kamala Harris. Will that actually prove to be a game changer or swing it in her favor? Because we are told this time men, and including working class men, are looking quite a bit at Donald Trump, especially when he's talking about more money in their pockets.
Yes, about 20 women voters are voting for Kamala at about 20% more than they are voting for Trump.
Okay.
And some of the things that Trump has said has turned the women off. He said he's going to protect the women whether they want it or not. So he has already turned off many voting blocks, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans. He has said derogatory things about many people.
Okay, but I want you to explain for a moment this special focus on Pennsylvania. And Kamala Harris has spent more time in Pennsylvania, 19 electoral college votes there. So, if you have a moment, and I know you're traveling extensively, explain the Pennsylvania push for our viewers, sir.
Yes. Right now, Pennsylvania is a toss-up.
Okay. The Republicans, it seems, are banking from several reports that are coming from the United States on the Hispanic, African American, and Asian male voters. And could that offset the 20% advantage that you were talking about in favor of Kamala Harris?
It is a concern. And we will have to just see how that turns out. Is that really a large enough a number to make a difference? I don't think so, but we'll find out in about 24 hours. We will know.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a question that's being asked in India extensively. Who will be better for India, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And given your connection, given that you're also a Marathi speaker, for our viewers, who will be better for India?
I think Trump will be a disaster for India because he wants to put a tariff on India, and those tariffs will raise prices for consumers, and it will not be good for the consumers. It will not be good for India. So I do believe that Kamala Harris will be important in having strong India-US relationships.
Okay, but what about approach to China? That's another issue that's being raised very extensively, that Donald Trump will have a harder stance vis-a-vis China. And will Kamala Harris, in your view, carry forward Joe Biden's legacy or his stance on China? How do you view this?
I don't think so. I think Kamala Harris is focused on economy. And if you look at in the past, economy has always been better under the Democrats. Stock market is always doing better under the Democratic administration. So I think Kamala Harris will have a trade policy that will be more balanced, as opposed to the very erratic policies of Donald Trump.
Okay. And will we have a clear result in the next 24 hours? Or in some states, could it either go into a recount or, perhaps as some argue, both sides have their legal teams ready? There could be a long-drawn legal affair?
I don't think so. I think there will be a clear winner. I expect Kamala Harris to win this election, and I expect her to win with a landslide.
Okay. Shri Thanedar, for joining me here on India Today. Sir, many thanks and wish you all the best as you continue to reach out to voters, asking them to come out and vote in larger numbers. Lenka White, one quick question. I have the last 30 seconds on this part of the broadcast. Are the expectations that there could be a clear answer by the 7th, or could it go into a long-drawn affair?
Good question. I have read extensively about that the major parties such as Trump and Harris, they are expected to announce the results actually this night. Donald Trump is having an event in West Palm Beach where he's expected to say something did we win or did we lose? But of course, it's going to be unofficial. It will still continue in the next 2-3 days because, for example, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, both of these states, they can only start counting mail-in ballots starting today. So it will take them a while. And you know, Pennsylvania, I was just reading, they had an electronic issue in one of the counties where they started 4 hours late. So now they are extending the voting system until 10 p.m. today instead of 6 p.m. So there are already some discrepancies. And I think the exact results will be only about, as you already mentioned, 2-3 days later. And I don't think any of the parties will want to give up the power that easily, that it will be smooth and sailing to the end.
Okay, they'll fight to the last vote, and even after that, till the last vote is counted. We'll be tracking that story very, very closely. Lenka White and Aviruk Sen for joining me here on India Today. As always, many thanks. And I quickly want to cut across to Rohit Sharma, India Today's Rohit Sharma, a man on ground, getting us the latest information from Washington, D.C. and speaking to our team across the United States of America. Rohit, any indications? What's the buzz on ground? Is it very exciting the way it was made out to be? Dead heat, equally, tremendous excitement on either side?
Well, look, we've gotten reports from everybody in America that the Republican voters are turning up to vote. Something President Biden has been talking about all along on his campaign. He's always said, please turn out to vote. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, the polling center that I've been at stationed this morning from 6:30 a.m., I have seen more Republican voters come in than Democrats. Now, some Democrats leaders are saying this is because Democratic voters usually use mail-in ballots and, they already voted early, which is a possibility. But looks like at least on the day of the event, the Republican voters are coming in. And I've spoken to some of them and, what issues are the most important to them. I probably should say about 80% of them have said immigration and open borders. And that relates to, burden on U.S. economy, that relates to immigrants taking jobs, that relates to crime. And I think these are some of the talking points that President Trump has used on campaign trail. I think he's kept his message very simple, Gaurav. He's always said, were you better off 4 years ago? And I think a lot of Americans have taken to that. I think that is one of the reasons why Republican voters have come out and they're voting a lot today. Also, one Democrat that I encountered, obviously not wanting to talk on camera, said they voted for President Trump because they believe that they do not agree with the fact that Biden and Kamala Harris, the way that all played out with, she got the nomination without fighting primaries. She said Democrats have been talking about preserving democracy. How was that democracy when she got the nomination without even going to primaries? So people do have long memories there. And it looks like, as President Trump also said this morning, very calm, very composed, very disciplined. He thinks he's going to win this. We'll have to wait and watch, Gaurav.
Oh, absolutely. And you'll know that first. You're a man on ground. I want to just quickly play out this report that comes from a very tiny hamlet called Thulasendrapuram in Tamil Nadu. And in this Thulasendrapuram, India Today spoke to several people who are actually super excited about Kamala Harris breaking that glass ceiling and becoming the first woman ever to enter White House as President of the United States of America. They're very excited about it. They're hopeful. Listen in.
We are reporting from the Sri Dharmashastra temple in Tulasendrapuram, which is the ancestral village of U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. If I have to speak about this village, this is the village where Kamala Harris's maternal grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, used to live before he moved to Chennai. And this temple, it also has a stone board which mentions the name of Kamala Harris having donated rupees 5,000 for the temple consecration in the year 2013-2014. It also mentions the names of her aunt, Sarla Gopalan, and her grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, for donating money for the temple works and renovation works, etc. Now, as far as this temple is concerned, the villagers of Tulasendrapuram, they've been offering special prayers. Special pujas are being held in the mornings and in the evenings, praying for Kamala Harris's victory, because it's a high-stake battle that has, played out in the United States. And the results, of course, we're just hours away from knowing who will be the next U.S. president. And I'm joined by the villagers here. It includes the local councillor, the villagers, and someone from US, Chicago. She's Joy. She's come from Chicago all the way to Tulisendrapuram, and she's taken a room right outside the temple and staying there for the night so that she can be associated in some way or the other to Kamala Harris on the day the US presidential election results would be out. You're rooting for Kamala Harris. Tell us why. Why do you think she'll make the next president, and why do you think that'll be the right choice as far as the US is concerned?
Well, Kamala is a uniter, and I believe that that's what we need. She's promised to have advisors from the Republican Party, and I also think that's what we need. Enough with the division. Let's unite.
Normally, Tamil Nadu insisting for women's empowerment. If she's come just US, no. Sunita Williams, see, she's heading for US NASA space like that. Everyone, it inspiring every individuals, ladies. So normally, if she got elected, no. So Indo-US relation will be definitely improve.
That, of course, is the sense from the ground, the mood on the ground. All of them really praying for Kamala Harris's victory. It was not an easy election, and it has huge consequences and implications, not just for the US, but for the rest of for the world. And that's the reason why they say every prayer counts, and that's why we're stepping in, praying for Kamala Harris. And they say because of Kamala Harris, Tulisendrapuram has also become more evident on the global map. With video journalist Daniel, this is Shilpa Nair for India Today.
So the world is watching voting that's currently underway in the United States of America. One of the key contenders, he's just cast his ballot, former president and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. He's voted in Florida. Now wearing that red Make America Great Again cap, Donald Trump was accompanied by his wife Melania. He said he's not even thinking about losing, but doesn't have a victory speech prepared, at least so far. Earlier in the day, Trump's running mate and Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance cast his vote in Cincinnati in Ohio. Polling is underway in 25 states, kicking off that final opportunity for America to vote in the bitterly fought, very tightly contested 2024 presidential election. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are running neck and neck. It's a neck and neck race. Now, some of the pollsters are saying it's 49%, 49%. Some are saying it's 48.5, 48.5%. Just minutes before the first vote was cast in this race for the White House. It's being described as the closest race in the history of the high-stakes 2024 US presidential elections. But it's also very interesting, and let me tell you about one small story from this tiny place called Dixville Notch. It's in the state of New Hampshire, and that voted midnight local time. So traditional, it's a decades-old tradition that's where the first vote is cast and counted. Now what we are being told right now, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, they're both tied with 3 votes each. In 2020, all the 6 votes had gone to Joe Biden.
Could you see a world where you don't declare victory tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same things that you're hearing. I'm hearing states where I'm up by a lot, but they won't have a final number for a long time. It should never happen. A thing like that should never happen. This election should be over. They spend all this money on machines. And frankly, if they'd use paper ballots, it would be over by 10 o'clock. And by the way, the paper ballots would cost 8%. It would be 8% of the cost. If they would use paper ballots, voter ID, proof of citizenship, and one-day voting, it would all be over by 10 o'clock in the evening. It's crazy. They use these very expensive computers, and I'm hearing in Pennsylvania they won't have an answer till 2 or 3 days from now. I think it's an absolute outrage if that's the case. Now, maybe it'll be later, but it's paper ballots in France. They went paper ballots because the mail-in was not working. It was corrupt. And in France, they went paper ballots. And at 10 o'clock in the evening, they had 37 million votes counted and done. They had a winner, they had a loser. And in this country, I mean, I'm just hearing that in certain states, it's going to be a long time, and it won't even be close. It won't even be that close. They say, I'm going to win the state, but it's going to take a long time to certify it. Well, it'll be just that. We want to bring everybody in. We want to be very inclusive, and we will be very inclusive. We have a great country, but we have a country that's in trouble. It's in big trouble in many ways, and we have to straighten it out. We have crime is through the roof. We have people pouring through our borders that are not exactly perfect. They come out of prisons. 13,000 people convicted of murder. We don't need this in our country. We have enough difficulty. We don't need that. So I think people saw that. And it just seems that the conservatives are voting very powerfully. Look, I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
Appreciate you coming out to see one of the great traditions, of course, in American democracy. I, of course, voted for Donald Trump and myself. So did my wife, and we also, for all the locals out there, we voted for Bernie Moreno for the United States Senate. And if you want the policies of Donald J. Trump in the United States Senate, then Bernie Moreno is the only candidate in this race who I think is the candidate of peace and prosperity for the United States Senate. So I hope people will get President Trump over the finish line. I hope people here in Ohio will get Bernie Moreno over the finish line. Look, I feel good. You never know until you know, but I feel good about this race. I felt good about my own race a couple of years ago when I voted in this exact same spot. Hopefully it goes as well for President Trump and me as it went for me a couple of years ago in the state of Ohio.
Are they capable of cheating? Of course they are. If they win the case against me and the case against Trump, we go to jail for the rest of our lives. So I'm a proud American who did it to save my country from a criminal. I do it all over again. I do everything I did all over for the sake of my country.
So this election is too close to call. Both sides trying to get their voters out even at the 12th hour. It's beyond the 11th hour. Voting's already underway. Elon Musk has actually gone to the extent of saying, go out and vote as if your life depends on it. So this last-minute pitch trying to get voters to vote. Many questions. Who will win? Who's better for India? Joining me on this special broadcast is Ambassador Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India, and Seema Sirohi is a columnist who joins us from the United States of America, somebody who's traveled extensively to see how America is voting. And Seema, how's the josh amongst the voters today and in the run-up to these elections? Who are they more excited about voting? What's your initial impressions?
I think this is one of the most consequential elections in America. The voter enthusiasm and turnout is off the charts for both parties. But, it'll depend on the ground game at the end of the day, where the Democrats just have a much better program on the ground because they have been at it consistently. The Republicans and Donald Trump campaign kind of neglected that aspect until Elon Musk stepped in and said, I'll pay people to go and knock on doors and things like that. But see, the point is, when you get paid workers compared to volunteers who actually feel for the candidate or the party, it's a different thing. Democrats have been knocking on thousands of doors per minute in battleground states, while the Republican game is little off. So I think that could be crucial. The gender gap is very important in this election. Whether Kamala Harris gets more women to the polls than Trump gets men to the polls. So he's doing better with younger men in all demographics, Black Americans, of course, white Americans, even Latino, even Indian Americans. A slice of the young Indian Americans are leaning towards Trump. Now, but it's very interesting, the poll in Iowa, which sort of showed Kamala Harris in lead, which is a red state, at this late stage. And people are saying that it's because of the women. The women are what used to be called soccer moms are now soccer grannies, and they just are very agitated about the
abortion.
Abortion issue. And maybe Trump campaign underestimated that. So the battle will be economic issues versus the women's issues, and who gets more people to the polls.
Interesting you should mention that, because Ambassador Sibal, the manner in which Elon Musk had to come out and say, vote as if your life depends on it. He's asking men to come out and vote in larger numbers, and Seema's just explained that women en masse appear to be voting for Kamala Harris, and not just, whether it's African American women or Latina or Asian women, white women. It just appears that unless more men go out and vote, is it a lost or a losing battle for Donald Trump? Your appreciation, sir? And do you think we'll have clear answers by tomorrow, or is it too close to call?
Look, for Americans who are voting for what is a national election, all that you have mentioned is very important. The country is highly polarized. There is a great fear amongst the Democrats that if Trump becomes president, he will start settling scores with the Democrats. And the Trump camp feels the opposite. But for us sitting here in India, these details are interesting in the sense of following the trend and trying to put our finger on the pulse of what is happening. But at the end of the day, what is relevant to us, what is important to us, what is meaningful to us is whoever wins, what will be their policy towards India, and B, what will be their policies on issues which affect India.
Give me a moment. Donald Trump is about to speak. Give me a moment. It's a slightly hazy feed that I'm getting from Florida. These are live images that are coming in. Let's try and listen in to Donald Trump.
Well, I hear, I don't know, the people you mean, numbers of people, a lot of people. They'll be at the convention center at Mar-a-Lago. We have a lot of people. I've just been very honored to find out that the lines are long, and the conservative lines, the Republican lines are very long. We got back pretty late last night, and it was an honor. It was a great honor. We had 4 incredible rallies and left Michigan late at night. Many of you were with us, and I hear we're doing very well. I hear we're doing very well. We did a great job in that we brought it back to the states, as you know. I believe in exceptions, as Ronald Reagan did. And we did a great job. We did something that they've wanted to do for 52 years. Yes, please. Well, it'll be just that. We want to bring everybody in. We want to be very inclusive, and we will be very inclusive. We have a great country, but we have a country that's in trouble. It's in big trouble in many ways, and we have to straighten it out. We have crime is through the roof. We have people pouring through our borders that are not exactly perfect. They come out of prisons. 13,000 people convicted of murder. We don't need this in our country. We have enough difficulty. We don't need that. So I think people saw that, and it just seems that the conservatives are voting very powerfully. Just finish it up. No, I feel very confident. I have felt. We went in with a very big lead today, and it looks like Republicans have shown up in force. So we'll see how it turns out, but it seems that they have really shown up in force. I just got a call from Dan Patrick in Texas. He said they've never seen anything like it. It's been very good. Look, regrets, you always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. Look, I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the 3. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best, I would say this was the best campaign we ran.
President Trump, do you accept the possibility that you and Vice President Harris both might not get to 270 electoral votes by the end of tonight?
It should never happen. A thing like that should never happen. This election should be over. They spend all this money on machines. And frankly, if they'd use paper ballots, it would be over by 10 o'clock. And by the way, the paper ballots would cost 8%, would be 8% of the cost. If they would use paper ballots, voter ID, proof of citizenship, and one-day voting, it would all be over by 10 o'clock in the evening. It's crazy. They use these very expensive computers, and I'm hearing in Pennsylvania they won't have an answer till 2 or 3 days from now. I think it's an absolute outrage if that's the case. Now, maybe it'll be later, but it's paper ballots in France. They went paper ballots because the mail-in was not working. It was corrupt. And in France, they went paper ballots. And at 10 o'clock in the evening, they had 37 million votes counted and done. They had a winner, they had a loser. And in this country, I mean, I'm just hearing that in certain states, it's going to be a long time, and it won't even be close. It won't even be that close. They say, I'm going to win the state, but it's going to take a long time to certify it.
Could you see a world where you don't declare victory tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same things that you're hearing. I'm hearing states where I'm up by a lot, but they won't have a final number for a long time.
What are your plans for tonight in terms of watching the results and so forth?
So we're going to have a very special group of people, many of whom you know, and they'll be at Mar-a-Lago. In addition, we'll have 4,000 or 5,000 people at the convention center. On the assumption I win, I mean, I don't know if something else happens. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of declaring victory, but if in normal times I would go over to the convention center, let's say at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something, but I just don't know. It looks like we have a very substantial lead. It looks like we have many more Republicans voting today than Democrats. So if you have a lead and we have a bigger vote, that means you're doing very well, but they have to call a winner. They should, and they should call a winner, yes. Just stop talking about that. Go ahead. Oh, I don't know. I was honored to get Joe Rogan last night. I mean, Joe Rogan's a big deal. He's a very respected person. And I must tell you, Megyn was fantastic. She got up and said some things that were really pretty amazing. But before that, I just think we ran a good campaign. I had good policy. We want people to come into our country, but they have to come in legally. You know, we want strong borders, and we want people to come in. We want to be totally inclusive, but they have to come in. I think that was a big issue. To me, that was the biggest issue. I may be wrong. You know, a lot of people said inflation. Inflation's a disaster, but I think it's a second issue. I think the first is the border. We can't allow criminals to be put back into our country or to be put into our country. So you have 13,000 plus murderers allowed to roam in our country. Not going to be allowed. They have to go. You have drug dealers. You have terrorists. You have a tremendous amount of people that should not be in our country, and we need strong borders in this country. And I think people are voting in. I think it's personally, I think it's the number one issue. We'll see how it pans out, but I think it's the number one issue. I don't have to tell them that. I don't have to tell them that there'll be no violence. Of course there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people. I don't have to tell them that. And I certainly don't want any violence, but I certainly don't have to tell. These are great people. These are people that believe in no violence. Unlike your question, you believe in violence. Go ahead. Well, I think I'll be at Mar-a-Lago for the most part. We have a lot of political professionals. I'm going over now with Melania, who I'm very proud of. She's got the #1 bestseller. Can you believe that? He can believe it. But so we're very proud of the job she's done with that. Her book is #1. But we're going to go over to the office in West Palm, and we're going to say hello to the workers. They've worked very hard. Will Georgia kind of be your first indication of whether it's going to be a good I think so. I mean, I hear we're doing very well there. in Georgia. I hear we're doing very well. I hear we're doing very well everywhere. Now, I may regret that statement, but I'm hearing that we're doing very well. Would you go louder? No, I haven't prepared a speech. No, I did speeches last night, all day long, all night long. At 2 o'clock in the morning, we left, and we did a lot of speeches. You can probably tell. No, I don't have to do that. You know, I'm not a Democrat. I'm able to make a speech on pretty quick notice. If I win, I know what I'm going to say, and I don't even want to think about the losing part. I would like to tell all of the people that are online to stay online. We have tremendous Republican lines, and I've been asked actually to say it. It takes a while. I'd like to just make the statement that I'd like the Republicans to stay online. Democrats, if they'd like, they can leave. But I'd like the Republicans to stay online. I have no pressure whatsoever. I'm winning big cases. Those cases are all being won. The biggest case was the Florida case, and it's been won. I appreciate your nice question.
Sir, you and Mrs. Trump have been doing
no
this
pressure whatsoever.
For nine years. Regardless of what happens tonight, is this your last campaign? Are you done after this?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so.
How do you feel about that?
Sad and very fulfilled. I think we're going to have a very big victory today.
Mrs. Trump, how are you feeling?
Very good, thank you. Thank you.
You win, sir, if you win, do you have a plan in place to start naming staff and officers?
We're already a transition team, but I don't like talking about that until I find out how we do. I mean,
So how does this sort of threats from Iran and sort of assassination attempts sort of shape your thinking on the subject, right?
well, it doesn't. Look, we're not looking to do damage to Iran, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. That's my terms are very easy. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I'd like them to be a very successful country, but they just can't have a nuclear weapon.
Does it change the way you live? All the threats?
Well, I think Secret Service has been a little bit tougher, to put it mildly. I see more machine guns than I've ever seen in my life. We're surrounded by, I feel very confident with Secret Service. I think they've stepped up. Look, for a long time, they didn't give us the help. They didn't give us the assets, as they say, the manpower, woman power. They didn't give it to us. And we'd have rallies. You saw the rallies, 50, 60,000 people. And I'd have less people than Joe Biden, who had 5 people show up. And I'd have 55,000 people show up, and I had fewer people than him. So they should have done a much better job. And frankly, the president should make a very strong statement to the outside world. Because
How are you feeling about your team as you head into the last day?
I think my team is incredible. Look, they say it's the best run campaign they've seen. Some people said it's the best run campaign they've ever seen. But in order to make that stick, you have to win.
How do you feel compared to your past campaigns? Are you more confident now than you were about your team than you were in the last 2 races?
My team, I'm very confident in. Many of them are the same players. As you know, Susie, a lot of the people are the same players. They've been very good.
Mr. President, Oprah said at Harris's rally last night, quote, if we don't show up tomorrow, it is entirely possible we won't be able to count the ballot again.
Well, I think it's ridiculous. You know, Oprah, I was on her last show, or one of her last shows, and they picked the biggest people and all of that, and made a big deal. And I'm disappointed. I think Oprah's become a major divider in our country, and I think, frankly, she should be ashamed of herself. And you know who else should be ashamed? Fox. Because I've seen Oprah on Fox about 50 times making the same statement, and I think it's a disgrace what Fox does, because everyone thinks Fox is so pro-Trump. They're not pro-Trump at all. They've put Oprah on all morning long. That's all I see is Oprah. And, I knew Oprah very well. She's been at Mar-a-Lago many times. Roger King had his funeral. That's the head of King World, which was Oprah's mentor. And Oprah chose the location. She said, Mar-a-Lago is the most beautiful place. Would it be possible to have Roger's funeral at Mar-a-Lago in the ballroom? We did it. The only time I've ever had a funeral there. And I think Oprah should be ashamed of herself to say that. She should be ashamed. She knows me. She wanted to run with me as a vice president. She was going to be the vice president. She wrote me a letter. It's in the book. And now she goes and makes statements like that. She's a divider. And Barack Hussein Obama is a divider, too.
There are people who are concerned that you didn't concede the election in 2020 when you lost. They're concerned that if you lost this election, you wouldn't concede again. What do you say to those people?
I think they're crazy. If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. And I think well, so far, I think it's been fair. I think there's been a lot of court cases. Both sides are lawyered up. Thousands of lawyers are involved, thousands, can you imagine? And part of that is because we have too complicated a process. If we had a piece of paper, watermarked, you know that paper is more sophisticated now than computers. It's watermarked paper. It's unbelievable what happens with it. There's nothing you can do to cheat. And it costs you practically nothing to run. Think of it. We spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on these campaigns. You could do it for 8% of the cost and have accuracy, and we wouldn't have to be worried about when is Pennsylvania going to announce. It's really a shame.
Last question.
Well, he knows exactly what, but that's only based on what RFK told. I don't think RFK wanted that. You're talking about Health and Human Services. Let me tell you, he's a great guy, RFK, and he's going to do pretty much what he wants as far as I'm concerned. He wants health for women, for men, for children, and I happen to agree with a lot of the things he says. The one thing I told him, and I've told you in speeches for the last 2 weeks, we got to keep him away from the liquid gold, because the liquid gold, we have more than any of it. It's called oil and gas. That one I'm going to handle. Well, I'd be honored to have him. Now, I haven't spoken to Howard about that, but look, if you think of it, he came in third, in running for president, right? He ran a very good race. He had obstacles. The Democrats just really unfairly put obstacles up, and Henson Kennedy left the Democrat Party for the Republicans. Now, he's a very smart guy. He's a very caring guy. He's very popular, too. We get up and introduce him. The place goes wild. No, we love having him. And you know who else we love having? Elon. He's been great. And everybody, look, everybody. Getting Joe Rogan last night and Megyn Kelly. This is very inclusive. This is a movement. This is the greatest political movement in the history of our country. And even you people, and some of you are fair sometimes, but it's the greatest movement in the history of our country, and I've made that statement 1,000 times. It has never been challenged. It is the greatest movement, and we're going to make America great again. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. This way. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
So Donald Trump there, you heard Donald Trump. He says, I'm very confident that I have the lead. Larger number of Republicans are coming out to vote. Seema Sirohi and Ambassador Kanwal Sibal with me in a moment. We'll also be joined by my colleague Rohit from the United States of America. But Seema, your first take on what Donald Trump just said. Is he confident or is he apprehensive that something could still happen between now and results, and he fears perhaps some kind of jiggery-pokery with the ballot?
I think he's just tired. The age factor is coming into play, but he's right about reminding everybody about Joe Rogan. That endorsement, if it had come a little bit earlier, would have been tremendously powerful for his campaign. Joe Rogan, as you know, has millions of followers, and he's considered somewhat non-partisan. It's not as if he's like a die-hard Republican or anything. He wanted Kamala Harris to come on his podcast. She did not. So Trump's, going to get some mail votes thanks to Joe Rogan's, because that little capsule from where he endorses Trump is going viral. Now, in terms of confidence, both both parties have to project confidence. I mean, that's the logical thing to do, isn't it? Kamala Harris's people are extremely confident that all of the ground game, all of the early voting, all of everything is showing in their favor. That women are breaking in their favor, Latinos in Pennsylvania are breaking in their favor, Puerto Ricans, whom you know that Donald Trump's campaign annoyed because they call this comic who called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. That has actually been very detrimental because they are in the key state of Pennsylvania, which both sides have to win to have an easy path to victory.
19 electoral votes straight, that adds up. Stay with me for just a moment. Ambassador Sibal, you were doing this SWOT analysis and you said for us what's more important, who's better for India? Does it make a difference whether it's Kamala Harris or it's Donald Trump? In your appreciation, who's better for India, sir?
Well, before that I answer that question, I listened to the feed that you played out, and I was very surprised, because Trump came out as very sober, very relaxed, very matter of fact. He exuded confidence. He was poised. I didn't detect any bluster, even in answer to difficult questions, whether he'll accept the election and this and that. He was very forthright on that point. He came out rather well. I thought that he might say things as he normally does, which might actually make you wonder whether he's fit for the presidency. But my appreciation is that he didn't say anything wrong. As regards your other question, I think it cuts both ways, in the sense, in some areas, the continuation of the Biden administration under Kamala Harris would be positive, because a lot was achieved with America during the Biden presidency. You are aware of so many agreements that have been signed, especially in the area of technology. It was remarkable that the National Security Advisor was leading this from the American side. And then, INDEX and, defense agreements, space agreements in the area of space, everything else. These are very solid achievements. Now, if Trump comes to power, one has to wonder whether his NSA would lead this process, or will he not lead the process, whether some of these things that were started would continue. There is also the economic agenda, which in the case of Trump can be more difficult to handle.
So the 20% additional tariff that he's warning about, and I'll just get Seema to respond to that, and we'll take this conversation forward because it's getting very interesting. But I have Rohit, my colleague, who's joining me from Washington, D.C., and I quickly want to cut across to Rohit. Rohit, what are voters like? What's getting them to the polling station? Because in the end, if it's such a close election, I'm being told whoever gets more voters to vote at this time may just, pull it off in the end. What are you picking up?
Gaurav, the fact of the matter is this is a very close election, very hard-fought election. President Trump said something that I've been also hearing from the battleground states of Michigan and Pennsylvania. His voters are coming out. They are coming out to vote in numbers, which I have also witnessed here in a Fairfax County, which is pretty blue. I'm not seeing a lot of Democrats come in. I spoke to the election commissioner here not too while ago, and I asked him about that. He obviously did not say that, but he said that they've received lesser number of mail-in ballots. So when I talked to a Democrat right here, they said Democrats are not showing up because they've mailed in ballots. But compare it to 2020 election, the Democrats, the numbers of mail-in ballots are down. So this definitely weaves into what Trump has been saying. He's getting a lot of support across the nation. I think he's probably getting the same report that we are on the ground. And look, when you talk about the states like Pennsylvania, where we've been there, we've done ground reporting, we've been to the door knocking campaign. It is a split. I think in the last 10 days, we've seen President Trump say something. We've also seen President Biden call the Trump supporters as garbage. So that will obviously play some role. But for the moment, from the ground, talking to a lot of people and campaign people on both the sides, it looks like Trump voters are coming and voting, and they're standing in line, and they are more dedicated to vote for Donald Trump. So what we heard him say, I think he came across as humble. He was nice. This is the first time he said, if I lose, that's fine. But I think he was trying to allude to the fact that, he's not going to lose this election. And I think from whatever he said about a lot of other things, he has been very disciplined. And that was his nature coming out in this campaign. Yes, as Seema said, he did come across as tired. But the fact is, Trump's leading as far as voter numbers are concerned on the voting day. Now, what happens with mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania? We'll have to wait and watch for it. But at least in numbers of voters who are getting out and standing in line for vote, it is advantage Trump right now.
And how soon will we know, Seema? And Rohit, stay with me if you can. I know you're traveling quite a bit, talking to a number of voters. Stay if you can. But Seema, how soon are we likely to know who has a clear edge? Or could it extend to days?
No, hopefully it won't extend to days. And by late tonight, our time, Tuesday night, we should have a sense, especially if some of the swing states that count early declare their results. So we'll get a sense of where things are going. Pennsylvania is going to take time because they have a complicated way of counting. They don't start counting the mail-in ballots till the voting is closed on that tonight. So it's going to take a while.
So that happens after 8 p.m. That happens after 8 p.m. In fact, I was just drawing that list out. Georgia, they say that they expect results fast, 80% in the first hour after 7 p.m. EST. And then within an hour after that, mostly all North Carolina, 7:30, Michigan, 8, Pennsylvania, 8 mailing votes, then Arizona, 9, Wisconsin, 9, Nevada, 10. Within an hour of that, would we have a clearer picture?
We hope to, unless there's some dispute and some, contestation. You remember last time it took 4 days for all the states to, to declare their votes. So we just have to wait and see. Hopefully it'll be smooth if everything, because they have put in a lot of reforms since 2020 to make the process smooth. I just... wanted to comment. I agree with Ambassador Sybil on what he said, that Trump came across as calm and collected. I wish he had done that over the past 2 days, because even last night at his rallies, he was calling immigrants savages and animals and things like that. So either it's a very clever, devilish strategy, which is that all that stuff resonates with his supporters, that, they hate immigrants, illegal immigrants especially, so much that it works. And now today, when everything is over, campaigning is over, he plays the cool, calm guy, confident. So, it could be that. But I'm struck that his message till the end was rather dark and...
that he'll make America great again. It's broken and he'll fix it. That's the message he's trying to give out throughout. But Ambassador Sybil, and both Seema, so one by one, the point that you were raising, more predictability with the Harris administration, unpredictable Trump administration is some of the apprehensions. 20% additional 20% tariff on Indian exports is an apprehension. But what about issues like, Ambassador Sybil, Citizenship Amendment Act or Jammu and Kashmir or India's internal affairs? Will the Harris administration interfere more compared to Trump?
Well, they could if they are determined to set the relations back. They could, or they could continue as before. I think if they go down the paths which you are indicating, it'll create obstacles in the relationship. And many of the things that we did with the Biden administration would not move forward with the pace that we might want that to happen. You can never say whether the progressive wing will influence her more in that direction, but maybe not. It all also depends on who she chooses as the Secretary of the State, Secretary of Defense, and all the key positions, the NSA. You see, Kamala Harris, let's be very frank about it. She's not up to the job at all. At all. She's hollow, unprepared, inexperienced. She hides her incompetence and her lack of gravitas by just laughing away. That's what she does. She'll be totally guided by the people who put her in power, whether it is Barack Obama or his wife or Clinton or whatever else. She'll listen to, she'll be very insecure. Therefore, it'll all depend on who she chooses as her team. That is one aspect. The other is that even if Trump were to win, the kind of issues you have mentioned will not be raised by him. But the think tanks, the press, the New York Times, Washington Post, and what have you, they will carry on the same kind of attacks on India as before. So it's not as if we'll have under Trump, we'll have less of a problem with regard to attacks on India by these lobbies, except that it will not be Secretary of State like Blinken, who will, by releasing a report on religious freedom or human rights, actually for the first time in our relations with the United States, name India. So that sort of a thing will be there. But on the economic side, we have to watch what he does, because Lighthizer will have an important position, I think, in his administration, and he is an absolute hawk on these issues, and he'll give no quarter to India. But then again, let's see when they have to face the situation in practical terms and look at it in the larger canvas of their relationship with India, will they then make mistakes on the economic side of a kind that will push India away, especially if they have to deal with China. We can't accurately predict what might happen, but I think on the whole, we'll manage. On the whole, we'll manage with both Harris if she becomes president or Trump if he becomes president.
Okay, Seema, your appreciation. You heard Ambassador Sibal describe Kamala Harris. Do you agree with that assessment that, it'll be more of perhaps Barack Obama or the Clintons who will be guiding Kamala Harris or running the White House from the back? Is that your appreciation too? And on the aspects where will India face more trouble on issues like CA or Kashmir or Article 370?
So there's no question that there are a lot of people from the Obama-Clinton era who are active in her campaign and who kind of are influential. I wish there were more of the Biden people who were, the policy people that Biden has, who had more of a sway. So it would depend on who her national security advisor is. Most reports say that it'll be a person called Phil Gordon, who is her current NSA as vice president. Now, he's a European expert and a little bit of a Middle Eastern expert, but he has been advising her on Indo-Pacific issues. So we should be in a good place in terms of continuation of the Indo-Pacific policy, and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar met him when he was here most recently. In terms of Secretary of State, the name that I hear most is William Burns, who is the current director of the CIA. He's a former, as you know, senior State Department official. He knows India very well, and he's one of the best diplomats the Americans have. So if all that works out, fine. But there will be a lot of lobbying and jockeying and everything. I think India should not worry too much about, which issue will gain precedence and which not. Because by the time, if she wins and forms her cabinet, people will bring their perspectives to the table. Overarching issue for America, both parties recognize, is the rivalry with China. So I think that's not going anywhere. It's not as if, Harris has a different point of view on that. She has traveled to Asia, although she did not go to India, but she has traveled in Asia as vice president and was kind of involved in the dialogue with South Korea and things.
But
In
have
terms of
relations
Trump,
grown? Okay, have relations grown more with the Republicans compared to the Democrats, Ambassador Sibal? Though right from the Kargil War of 1999, the relationship has constantly been on the rise, irrespective of whether the Republicans were there or the Democrats. Your appreciation of does it make a difference whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats at all?
On the whole, not really. Not really. What we may lose, whatever the phrase is, what we may gain on the rounds, we may lose on the swings, that kind of a thing. I mean, there are aspects on which the Democrats would be better for us and also worse for us, and there are aspects where Trump would be better and also worse for us. So on the whole, as you rightly said, and as we've been pointing out before, we've dealt with 5 presidents in the past from different parties. And with each president, despite some misgivings here and there, relationship has continued to develop positively. And the curve has been going upwards. And now that India is growing, India's salience is becoming more important. The China challenge is now very severe for the United States. The entire international scene has become far more complex. India is in a good place in every way. Therefore, the value of India has gone up. Added to the fact is that India now is seen as some kind of a voice of the global South, which adds to our diplomatic clout, if you like. Our successes in the G20 and everything else have built up our reputation. And very importantly, the fact that we have perhaps the most experienced leader in Prime Minister Modi compared to the people who will gain power here and there, because this is his 3rd term. So he's already been 10 years in power. He has dealt with all these fellows. Very good personal chemistry with Trump. With Kamala Harris, it didn't really hit off that well. She never visited India, despite the fact that she was invited. But nevertheless, as I said, India's relevance is being recognized, his importance is being recognized, his economy is becoming attractive, it is becoming an investment destination. With all this talk about resilient and trusted supply chains, India has a role to play. So in this larger, I think we can feel reasonably comfortable, but problems we'll have, and we will tackle them.
Problems will come, we'll tackle them. On that heartening note of India's rise and America's elections, we are tracking the story very, very closely. Ambassador Sibal and Seema Sirohi, many thanks for joining me.
Amitabh Mattu, if you go across the world, most incumbents this year have suffered setbacks. Even the BJP government here lost seats in 2024. The British government was wiped out of office. The Conservatives were out of office. There's a sense that this could be the year where every incumbent, and in this case the Biden-Harris presidency, you could argue, faces challenges. You're the one outlier who's gone on a limb and said you don't expect a Trump 2.0, but the world might well suggest this could be Trump as the new anti-establishment figure in a way.
I mean, obviously, as I said, the pollsters still think it's a dead heat. But in terms of the economy as well, the American economy is surprisingly doing remarkably well. And inflation figures are often exaggerated. The poor state of the economy is often exaggerated by Trump and his supporters. And in terms of bilateral relations, there are 2 reasons why I think Trump would be bad for India. One, you have still a large number of people from Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Punjab, Gujarat going on, just to name a few states anecdotally, who go on H-1B visas. He's going to come hard on H-1B visas. So Indian professionals who see America as a land of opportunity, that will start trickling down. Secondly, in terms of trade, he has said that he is going to probably put a 20% tariff on Indian exports into America, which means that the net impact, as someone's worked out, it could be as much as 0.03% of India's GDP could come down because of the tariffs that Trump would lay down. What is the pro? What is the good side? Trump is not really worried about what you do within the country. He's not as much as the Democrats going to be interfering on human rights issues, on issues like non-proliferation. But he is unpredictable. You never know what Trump will do the next day. The fact that 90% of his previous administration, anyone who served in his cabinet or with him as a vice president or otherwise in the armed forces has no confidence in him should reveal how much faith people have in him who have worked with him.
Yeah, but he does, in his last days, Michael, in the last few days, his campaign has been, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Just to get a sense from you, Michael, in terms of foreign policy, do Americans believe they're in a better place today than they were 4 years ago? Are they in a worse place today than they were 4 years ago?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say without proper polling data, but I think that many Americans recognize that foreign policy and foreign affairs have become an issue in this election and could well have an impact on it, particularly the Israel-Gaza war, and the fact that you have some key voting constituencies, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, that have been very unhappy about the Biden administration's policies to the point that, many experts are saying that a swing state like Michigan could the outcome there could be impacted by considerations about U.S. foreign policy. But typically U.S. elections, like elections in many countries, are decided by bread and butter issues, economic issues, other domestic issues. What is notable about this year's election is that I do think that foreign policy considerations will have some type of impact, not a dominant impact, but an impact nonetheless.
Venu Rajamani, in conclusion, you suggested interestingly that this election is about diversity versus this notion of America first that Trump puts up. Do you believe that diversity can triumph? There's a fear that Kamala Harris has moved so far. I mean, her critics suggest that she has moved so far down left that she's lost that centrist space, and that's the one that Trump hopes to capture in the next 24 hours.
Well, she originally comes from the left, and she has been trying to position herself more in the center in order to win the elections. We see what is happening. In fact, what is happening in Gaza, her position there, which is still very pro-Israel, is a typical reflection of the fact that she has moved from her original base. But ultimately in politics, in US politics, which is the most important, the oldest democracy in the world, the most powerful nation in the world, it is important that decency triumphs. It is important that rules triumph or ethics triumph. And in all these aspects, Trump is such a failure that if he were to win, it is a colossal tragedy for democracies across the world, not just for the US. And as I said, it sets a trend for many more things to happen. If Trump starts a witch hunt, if Trump starts undermining constitutional institutions, which he already did during his previous term, even when he loses and if he challenges the elections, all this portends very badly for democracies across the world, for the liberal order. And if his effort to spew hatred, to build on this rhetoric over immigration, to create the fear of migrants as the main winning plank for himself. Added to that is also a certain amount of Islamophobia, which again has been seen in his previous terms. I think this is a very sad day.
Dhruva Jaishankar, is that true that Indians in America are seeing this through the prism of pluralism, or is there any truth to these reports that suggest that Indian Americans are largely supporting a Trump presidency?
So the honest answer is we don't know, we'll see, but I think two things to look at in terms of the Indian American vote. So one is historically, Indian Americans, about 2/3, between 65 and 70% of Indian Americans tend to be registered Democrats who vote reliably Democratic. About 25% tend to be Republican and vote Republican. Overall, compared to other ethnic groups, that suggests that Indian Americans are actually amongst the most Democratic leaning traditionally of ethnic groups in the US. And I think, while there are a lot of, and perhaps growing number of Trump and Republican supporters, they still represent a minority. Now, the other thing to look at is just a couple of recent surveys that have been done, including one by the Carnegie Endowment, on Indian American voting patterns. And they suggest that there is a slight increase, particularly amongst younger men, towards the Republican Party. And there's also some differences amongst first generation versus second generation Indian Americans and how they're going to vote. We'll see how much of that trend is there. Again, anecdotally, there's some suggestion that Trump is able to appeal to some of these Indian American voters, and they may vote for the first time for the Republican ticket.
Why would young Indian American voters choose Trump? What is it about Trump that would make it so attractive for them?
No, again, we can speculate on some of the reasons. Some that have been anecdotally cited are on economic issues. They tend to be, want lower taxes. They want, for some of them, it's immigration. They believe that they've immigrated legally, but the Democrats are too soft on illegal or undocumented migrants. So again, we can speculate on some of the reasons. There's a little bit of polling data to suggest it, but not enough to reach firm conclusions.
Let me take what you just said to Clifford Young, because he does polling. Clifford, is there any truth to these reports that younger Indian Americans or the second generation tend to slightly sway towards Republicans compared to first generation who were overwhelmingly Democrats?
Yeah, well, we don't have data specifically on Indians, but if you look at second generation in general, especially Latinos, which is the largest non-white segment in the United States, there is a slight trend towards being a bit more conservative, a bit more Republican. Issues of the pocketbook, economic issues, and inflation are especially important. We have to emphasize that the whole reason that Trump is stronger this electoral cycle and the Democrats are a bit weaker is because of inflation, and those voters on the margins that typically might sway Democrat have been tilting more Republican. So second generation tends to be a little bit more conservative. Pocketbook issues are important, and they're especially important this electoral cycle because of the inflation issue.
Professor Mattu, your sense, why is this being seen as one of the most consequential elections in recent times?
Rajdeep, because this election in some ways represents two different visions of America and of American presence in the world. On the one hand, you have a Trump vision, which is a relatively isolationist vision, which doesn't believe in America taking responsibility for the security and stability of the world. It wants allies to pay for their own defense. European allies, Japan, doesn't want free riders, wants America to be great again in a sense that it wants manufacturing to return to America and not really engage with other people's conflicts or wars. Domestically, Trump represents the most divisive, toxic agenda that of any presidential candidate, while Kamala Harris is more of the same in a much more credible way as Biden had articulated. If you ask me, my gut feeling is that I think America is not ready for Trump too. It's ready for Kamala Harris.
You're saying something huge there. You're telling me today, you think America is not ready for Trump too. America is ready for Kamala, a colored woman. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I think the toxicity of Trump, particularly in the last few days, particularly during the racist slurs in Madison Garden, the obscene gestures with the microphone not working, has just brought home to the average American that no matter what Trump represents in terms of the old American dream, in terms of family values, in terms of making people work harder, getting them jobs, and giving them a vision of what America was like in the last century or the beginning of most of the 1950s and 60s. The fact is that is all really overwhelmed by the fact that Trump is himself unpredictable, mercurial in the euphemistic sense, and dangerous. He's playing out a playbook which Joe McCarthy's lawyer and then Trump's lawyer, Roy Cohen, laid out for him, which is speak lies, create a bullyish attitude by trying to drown out all opposition, and that'll help you win. Most of the time that he has succeeded. But my sense is, especially given the current polling, final polling, where Kamala Harris has seen a surge, that he is unlikely to win Pennsylvania. Kamala Devi Harris, to get her name right, will be the president of the United States, even if it's declared 90 hours from now.
You're saying Kamala Devi Harris, and that in itself, Venu Rajamani suggests there is this India connection. But as some of our reporters have been suggesting, Indian Americans in large numbers continue to support Trump. Do you believe that there is a clear distinction to be drawn at this moment between a Trump presidency and a Harris presidency? Or is there simply bipartisan consensus which shouldn't make all that much of a difference?
I think when it comes to India-US relations, as already mentioned by the previous speakers, the foundation is very strong. We have seen steady progress. We have seen a lot of major achievements. None of that are going to go away, irrespective of who becomes the president. But certainly, Trump and Kamala Harris are very different people. We will both have good points as far as India is concerned. Both will also have areas where we strongly disagree, and there are many irritants. But more important, I would say, is what Amitabh Mattu has been just talking about. We should first think in terms of who is good for the US, who is good for the world. There it is absolutely clear. If the kind of toxicity which Donald Trump represents wins, it is going to have an impact across the world. It could even have an impact in India. So
how would it have? Let's be clear. How would toxicity of Trump when he targets Puerto Ricans, when he targets immigrants, have an impact on India?
Because it is essentially a fight against pluralism. It is an opposition of anything foreign. This is where all xenophobia originates. This is where racism originates. This is where all these lot of lies which are spread about immigrants going and killing and eating cats and dogs. This is how the right wing feeds on its own rhetoric. We have seen it. This is not an American phenomenon alone. It is also happening in Europe. And this anti-immigrant sentiment can come back to bite both Indian immigrants abroad, can also spread to other countries. So a country like India, which is essentially pluralistic, whose biggest strength is our diversity, has to stand up for pluralism everywhere in the world. And I think Kamala Harris stands up for that much more than Donald Trump.
Let me just bring in some of those X factors and then go and look at what it means for India and why this election is so consequential. Just some of the X factors. The gender gap, the surge of support for Kamala Harris among women, will that sustain on this voting day? The other big X factor is America ready really for a female president? So will the gender gap, if anything, also work against her? There is that fear of rising immigration. That's been a consistent theme right through the Trump campaign, the fear that a Kamala Harris presidency would lead to open borders. There's the economy and price rise, and many believe it's the economy stupid, especially inflation. That could become a critical issue. And also, as we just said, who is able to get their maximum supporters to the polling booth? So all these factors will play in the wind. But Michael Kugelman, from your vantage point in Washington, what are you looking at in terms of a Trump presidency versus Harris presidency? Give us, from an Indian perspective, what should we in India be looking out for, a critical difference between the two?
Well, I mean, as we all know, these are two very different figures. We can agree that, in a broad sense, no matter who wins the election, the U.S.-India relationship will be in a good place. I mean, we know there's strong bipartisan support for partnership, and if you look at how the relationship has exponentially deepened over the last few decades, that's happened with multiple Republican and Democratic administrations in power, including, of course, the Trump presidency. But again, these are two leaders with two different approaches. I think that we could see, depending on the outcome, some old tension points in the relationship resurge, such as the issue of trade. We know that what little Trump has said about India on the campaign trail, much of it is focused on the issue of tariffs. I think that on the flip side, if Trump were to return, we might see an administration that would be a bit less present, so to speak, in terms of giving public voice to concerns about internal issues in India, including issues related to transnational repression. But if you look at their different foreign policies, the Russia factor, I think, has become a bit of a minefield in the U.S.-India relationship. If Trump's views on Russia continue to be as restrained as they appear to have been relative to both Harris and Biden,
Okay, we're having
Yes, that the Russia issue could become less of a minefield in the U.S.-India relationship.
So I want to get a pollster's perspective right at the very top first. Clifford Young, give us a sense of what the polls are saying, because it seems purely from the outside right till the very end, the polls seem to be playing safe, barring a couple of outliers that mostly then predict Trump winning. Most of the other recognized polls seem to say too close to call. Is it too close to call?
Yeah, it's neck and neck. A year's worth of campaigning, a year's worth of rhetoric, a year's worth of politics, and we're 50-50, whether it's at the national level or in the key swing states. That's what the polls say. And ultimately, the election might just be decided by the last few days of getting the vote out. The Harris side really pushing the abortion issue, the Trump side really pushing the immigration issue. The side that can get their side out is more likely to be the victor. But right now, the polls are neck and neck.
You're saying neck and neck, and you're saying it depends on turnout, but any indications from these early mail polls or postal ballots that we could get, or you believe that it's simply impossible to predict at this stage?
Early voting before Election Day, that has not been a very good indicator of what actually happens. Ultimately, I'd be very careful at that. By our own polling at Ipsos, we think the turnout will be lower than 2020, but higher than 2016, excuse me. Who that advantage is, that's very unclear. And we're really going to have to wait and see.
Okay, Dhruva Jaishankar, you're joining us there from Washington. Your sense there from your vantage point, is it, as was just suggested, too close to call? There's the whole campaign for immigration that Trump has launched, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, and the abortion rights issues of Kamala Harris. Is it too close to call, you sense?
So, the polling is, as you know well, including in India, is an inexact science because it's predicting in some ways what people's intentions are, future intentions are. And there's also a weighting of samples that pollsters do. One of the lessons they've drawn from the past few elections is that their weightage was often underplaying Trump supporters for a variety of reasons, and there's some sense a lot of the polls have now corrected that. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that will remain to be seen, I think two things. How much has that polling error been addressed to some degree? Has there been an overcorrection, which is what some Democrats believe, mm-hmm. or is Trump support still undercounted? The second is actually just voter turnout, who actually shows up on the day, and that really is a question of enthusiasm amongst the bases of Trump and Harris supporters and of Republicans and Democrats. Again, the people are using proxies for that, the early voting levels, and how much the attendance at rallies to basically as proxies for how much enthusiasm there is, and there are mixed messages in all of that. So all of these uncertainties make it very difficult to predict at this point of time. One thing to look forward to, we may not have a result in the next 24 hours, but one thing to look forward to in the next 24 hours is how much enthusiasm has there been, particularly amongst women voters on the question of reproductive rights, mm-hmm. and on the question of immigration as well.
Interesting.
Let's kickstart our political stock exchange for the US elections. I'm joined on this broadcast by Michael Kugelman, Director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Catherine Hadda is at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We've got Daniel Brook from Foreign Affairs. I'll be joined by other guests during this broadcast as well. What I want to show you is just the extent to which America seems divided at this time. Looked at by demography and looked at by gender, America seems wildly split between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. I'll start with women who overwhelmingly, on account of issues like abortion, reproductive rights, seem to be leaning towards Kamala Harris. According to the NBC News' national poll, the last poll that came out, Kamala Harris has a 16-point advantage over Donald Trump. 57% women in the poll saying they're voting for Kamala Harris, 41% saying they're voting for Donald Trump. So big lead there for Kamala Harris amongst women who are, in terms of registered voters, a bigger chunk of the American population than men are. The moment we switch to men and look at voting preferences amongst men, this is where the Kamala Harris campaign seems to be running behind the Trump campaign, because here there is an 18-point lead that Donald Trump has. 58% of the men
polled by NBC say that they're going to vote for Donald Trump. 40% saying they will vote for Kamala Harris. So if this was just men, Donald Trump would be winning and winning easy. If this was just about women, Kamala Harris would be winning and winning easily. We do a lot of this in India as well, and very rarely is the difference as stark. The gap in terms of voting preferences between men and women very rarely quite as stark. I want to go across to our first guest. I'll start with Catherine Hadder at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Usually, pollsters have a good sense, as do commentators, about who seems to be in front. This is one of those elections where everyone just says, let's just sit back and watch what happens. It's really about who can bring voters out on polling day. From what you're seeing around you, which campaign do you think is looking stronger this morning?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think polling as a science, as you alluded to in the beginning, is sort of having a moment, and that it's becoming harder and harder to get accurate polls. I think you found that in India in your last election, and we're certainly finding it here. So I don't know. I think what you get from the polls depends on which polls you read a lot of the time. Personally, when it's this close, I think it'll be not only who comes out to vote, who's registered, who comes out to vote, but where they come out to vote. And we're really down to 7 swing states, and within those states, there are certain swing districts. So I think the closeness of the race is all going to depend on those districts and who comes out there.
Rohit Sharma joins us from Washington. This is, Rohit, really about every constituency, every county, every state, every voter mattering, because it's every little vote that in the end will determine who wins or loses this big presidential election.
Absolutely, Raul. I mean, we talk about polls, and we also talked about how close this election is. People are comparing this to the election in the 60s when Kennedy was fighting elections. And look, everybody in America is basically watching what happens tonight. Will America go back to Donald Trump? Will they go back to Kamala? Will they choose Kamala Harris? But importantly, these swing states and these small counties in these swing states will determine who gets to the White House. I mean, you're talking about counties, or you're talking about areas around Pittsburgh. You're talking about areas around Philadelphia, Allentown. You're talking about Maricopa County in Arizona. You're talking about the Wake County in North Carolina. These counties hold the key on who goes to the White House. And by the looks of it, it's very close. You talked about the numbers about, how there's a separation between women and men voters who are voting in stark comparison to what they have in the past. Also, the fact that, Raul, if 10 years ago somebody would have said that Donald Trump would be on stage with Muslim Americans, with Arab Americans, trying to appeal to Hindu Americans, trying to appeal to Latinos and black men, nobody would have bought it. It is that close of an election where Donald Trump is getting out there. He's putting himself out there, trying to build this coalition because he knows this election is very close. And Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she's definitely lost some lead among, the voters, Latino voters and men voters and all that. But she is hoping, and her campaign, when I spoke to them this morning, said they're hoping that women will come out and vote in all those counties that I talked about. The young women, the people who've registered in those colleges, young women in those colleges in some state like North Carolina, they're actually banking that those women will come out and vote for Kamala Harris so she can win this election. We might not know. We could even get to a 269 scenario if the poll is that close. But as of right now, I think America is very excited to take part in this all-consequential election.
Let me not hold you back. We'll come back to you for more later. Thank you very much, Rohit Sharma, for joining us from Washington, D.C. I want to go across to Jayant Krishna at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Jayant, it's really about who can pull more voters out. Men disproportionately seem to be wanting Donald Trump. Women disproportionately seem to be wanting Kamala Harris. From what you can pick up around you, where is the level of enthusiasm to go out and vote? It's one thing to have an opinion, as we saw in Indian states like Haryana recently. It doesn't matter what your opinion is, it matters who you're able to get out to the polling booth on polling day.
Yeah, absolutely, Rahul. I would believe more than the swing states which are being talked about, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada. I think, they would be crucial, but I think more than that, voter turnout would decide as to who is inside White House next. And also women, if women turnout is proportionately more than men and with little more swing in favor of Kamala Harris, would see her win. But, it's anybody's guess. And it is the most tightly contested U.S. presidential election ever that I remember, that I've been tracking in the last 3 decades or so. So I think it's anybody's game. Very, very difficult. No pollster has been able to predict with any accuracy, with any reasonable degree of confidence so far. And it's very, very interesting because both of them have very different take on various things that affect the economy of the U.S., geopolitical stuff and different parts of the world which are especially which are at war, be it Russia or Ukraine or Israel, Gaza, Iran, that area. So I think both have very different takes on that. Let's see which way.
So we're
the winds
seeing
blow.
Michael Kugelman, a very close contest in the United States. Just for a moment, imagine that this is a global presidential election where the world and their countries get to decide who they want as the president. Who do you think would win internationally? If governments internationally were to decide whether it will be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who do you think has the advantage internationally and why?
Well, I think that, on the whole, particularly in a moment like now when there's so much instability and volatility and uncertainty in the world, that many world capitals would prefer to see a leader that they would be most comfortable with, and that would be the one that's the least unpredictable, and that would be Kamala Harris. I think that our U.S. allies and partners that remember how things went during the Trump presidency when the NATO alliance and U.S. Relations with treaty allies in Asia took some major blows. And I think that those countries might be a bit concerned about the specter of a return of Trump. But, there are other leaders, I think, that would prefer not to see Harris and would prefer to see Trump, if you talk about a Vladimir Putin, for example. And I think I can't resist saying something about India here. I think that one could argue that there would be trade-offs for India with both Harris and Trump. I think that one could argue that some tension points, whether you're talking about the Russia factor or the issue of human rights, would be less prevalent if Trump were to return to the presidency. But I think that issues like trade tensions could come back to the fore if Trump were to return. Harris, I think, would be someone that New Delhi would be comfortable working with, because I think it would largely be seen as a continuation of the Biden administration to an extent. But at the same time, there might be concerns that a President Harris would be willing, like the Biden administration, to make a bit more noise about internal matters in India, such as rights and so on. So hard to give a short answer.
Well, President Trump might be more mercurial, but he's also transactional. Kamala Harris would likely keep the relationship going in the way that it's built up over the last several years. So both offer very different things. I want to welcome Edward Luce, U.S. National Affairs Editor for the Financial Times, and I'm joined by Dr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. For a moment, I want to go across to Dr. Aghi. From the perspective of India Inc., India-America business, do you think Donald Trump works better for that trade relationship, or Kamala Harris, or do you think it doesn't really matter so much in the end?
I think it does matter, because when you look at Trump has said he is going to impose 20% tax or tariff on goods coming out of India and 60% from China. This will have an impact on India's export into United States. But more important is you have to understand international relations, international trade is tied to stable, predictable policies. And while you have Biden administration, which has provided that stable policies, which may not agree on all of them, but there is predictability. Trump brings that unpredictability, and that's going to have a big impact on global trade, especially from India coming to the United States.
But Trump also might not be so bothered about some of the things that Kamala Harris might likely get very agitated about. And I think Michael Kugelman referred to that. For example, the manner in which Canada and India's ties have nosedived over the past several weeks on account of the alleged assassination attempt on one person in the United States and the assassination of Niger in Canada. Those kind of things Trump might not care very much about, whereas Kamala Harris might make a lot of noise around issues like that, which would be something that the Indian government would be very wary of.
No, absolutely. But you have to understand there's a big difference between what has happened and how it has been dealt by Canadians and the Americans. While Canadians have taken the lead from the Prime Minister's office, accusing India without any credible evidence that India is behind the assassination, whereas in the United States, it's not the Biden administration which has taken the lead, it's more of the Justice Department which has taken the lead, driven through a process, while India and the United States are working in a very mature manner. So I think that process will continue regardless who comes in, either Trump or Kamala Harris. So I don't think that's not going to change. But overall, I would say that while Trump has stated very clearly that he prefers Prime Minister Modi, he likes Prime Minister Modi, he does not like India as a tariff king itself. So you will see a split approach while he's going to talk about